Hello. Welcome to a special series of video programs produced by the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, CARICAD. We are located in Bridgetown, Barbados, and we were established to work, generally speaking, with the public sectors of the region to enhance their capacity and the ability to deliver public services. This special series is designed to tell you more about CARICAD and our work, and we invite you to learn more about the organization by visiting the website at www.caricad.net. As we continue in the series, today I am absolutely delighted. It is a real joy to welcome someone, and you'll forgive me for the little rhyme, who has the first name Loy. So joy with Loy today. And it's Dr. Lois Parkes, a very familiar name to those persons who would have participated in the Caribbean Leadership Project and those persons who participated in the CARICAD version of the Leadership Project, which was the natural successor to that initial initiative. So today I welcome Dr. Lois Parkes, and you're going to forgive us, we hope, if we end up speaking with each other as we do when we work together as Loy and Frankie. The respect remains even if the doctor title does not enter the conversation. First of all, I'm going to ask Dr. Lois Parkes to tell you a little bit about herself and her work, and then we'll get into our discussion today, which is about the enabling environment. And yes, the enabling environment, as soon as you hear that, I know you're going to wonder, what are they talking about? And I'm going to ask Dr. Parkes, when she's finished telling you a little bit about herself, to start off by describing for us what the enabling environment is, and then we'll get into a bit of a discussion about it. So, stay with us. Dr. Parkes, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very, very much. So, you heard my name, Dr. Lois Parkes. I am currently the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist with CARICAD, Caribbean Center for Development Administration. And prior to that, I was a regional project manager for the Caribbean Leadership Project. And that is where this particular tool around the enabling environment for leadership development and practice in Caribbean public services, that is where it had its genesis. And I had the distinction of being the head, the chair of the Action Research Roundtable, that we focus on research around this very topic, the enabling environment. So what are we talking about? The enabling environment, in very general terms, refers to the setting and context that allows and fosters positive learning, development, and practice of individuals and groups. That's the general term. But when we talk about enabling environment in the context of leadership development and practice, that is really about what is that environment and context in which public sector leaders can indeed thrive, learn, grow, and produce the results that they need to. All right? So that, in a nutshell, is the enabling environment.
You touched on a number of areas when you described what the enabling environment is. Mm-hmm. But that leads me to ask, why is the enabling environment important in general for the public sector?
Very good question. So it goes back to the fact that we're very focused on developing leaders, and we had a very in-depth leadership development program, again, started by the Caribbean Leadership Project, continued under the CARICAD banner. And Frankie, I'm sure you and our listeners have heard this before. You go on a training program and you say, but this is all well and good, but I can't practice it. There's a common complaint that people have and continue to have. And so when you question people, why can't they transfer the learning? It's really about this environment. The context does not allow them to practice what they have learned. And so we felt it was very important then to study this, do some research around this. What is this? What are these barriers people are talking about? And we, through research, we coined the term enabling environment. And so we recognize that for leaders to truly succeed, yes, you need a capacity building, but you also need to support leaders by providing them with a setting, the kind of support where they can really and truly practice the kind of leadership behaviors individually and collectively in order to really succeed as leaders in the public sector context, which, as you know, is extremely challenging.
So you're telling us research was done and there was a specific tool used. Now, when we talk about tools and research and so on, sometimes people who don't deal with these things every day are not so clear as to what exactly we mean. So tell us a little bit more about that process to get to a place where there would have been greater understanding of what needs to be done.
All right. So the research, it was a regional research. It was qualitative in nature. And the research team conducted 50 in-depth interviews with public sector leaders and even some leaders from CARICAD regional organizations as well, to find out their own leadership experiences. And from that research, we were able to distill the findings to identify what were those factors that allowed them as leaders to grow, learn, and to succeed as leaders in their own public service context within the Caribbean. And so we said, okay, many research papers have been written. So what? What do we do with it? And so, as the name said it's an action research. And so we wanted action to come from it. And so from the findings, we expanded the project to then include the development of an assessment tool using the findings that organizations can then use to make an assessment of what is the nature of their own enabling environment. How enabling is it really, based on the factors that the research showed helps to create and provide for an enabling environment. And so we created a multi-rater tool, and then we decided, not to just have it done manually, but to actually work with a software developer so that this was a tool then that could be accessed online, and using the software to analyze the findings from the multiple raters to then create a report about the particular organization being assessed and the state of their enabling environment. And we are currently, this was done in 2018, this is now 2025. So the tool still exists in use, but of course, technology has changed rapidly. And so we're actually now in the process of revamping that tool. And we are going to be making it better, being able to conduct even more in-depth analyses using the benefit of artificial intelligence. So that work is very much underway, and you can watch this space, the CARICAD space, to know when that new revamped artificial intelligence enabled tool is ready for use by our stakeholders and customers.
You spoke about evolving technology.
Yes.
You spoke about the importance of the environment, the elements of the environment. What, from a professional perspective now, are you hoping will come out of the work as it goes forward?
What we want to come out of the work as it goes forward is that we recognize, and to quote a very well-known leadership guru, John Maxwell, everything rises and falls on leadership. And especially in our public services in the region, much is required. There's so much scrutiny, so much accountability that is required, especially from our senior public sector leaders. And that, as it should be. But I think if we want leaders to succeed, we not only have to hold them accountable, we also have to support them. It is in no one's interest for our public sector leaders to fail, right? And so this is about not just taking a very ad hoc approach. But this is really taking a more evidence-based approach to really understand what is the environment that leaders are existing in now? What are the factors that are working well, and what are those areas for improvement? And so, having done that assessment, there's a third part to the tool. So there's the research, there's the assessment tool, and then there are now the action tools. And so we have a plethora of tools that then organizations can use on their own or with assistance from CARICAD, technical assistance from CARICAD, to devise strategies for them to close the gaps that have been identified through the assessment.
You're speaking about closing gaps, but as you think back to what has emerged so far, how do organizations access this tool? Is it an option for them, or is it something that they must be selected as part of a special study program? How do we get organizations to have access to the tool?
Well, you simply have to, reach out to us and just email us at info@caricad.net, and we will just follow up with you, work with you, identify what part of your organization is going to be involved in that research, who the raters are, and we will then work with you to get that assessment done and to also help you to analyze and to utilize the results in order to conduct whatever improvements that might be needed. And I think it's important that, just going back a little bit more about the tool, okay? And so from that research, because it's so important to understand the research findings and therefore what's the kind of information that the assessment will tell you, okay? And so the research found that essentially across the Caribbean, there are many leadership theories, but very broadly speaking, there are three broad areas of leadership styles and traits that exist. There's the authoritarian, and thankfully research showed that in our public services, you don't really have authoritarian type leadership that exists. Then the second area is the transactional. And we have found, alas, that tends to be the most predominant style of leadership that exists in our public services, which poses a challenge if we are intending to transform our public services. And then the last area is the transformational leadership category. And so the assessment then breaks that down into 4 broad areas based on the integral model developed by Ken Wilber. And so there is the individual level where leaders who are transformational are very purpose-driven. And their purpose is really rooted in their belief systems and their values. And then that leads to the second area, which is transformational leaders are in action. So they're very deliberate about their own behaviors, how they show up, how they communicate, how they sell vision, how they lead their teams, etc. The third area relates to culture. And so transformational leaders tend to be persons who collaborate. And so they know how to tap into their networks in order to problem solve, to break down barriers, and they're very good at creating a culture of collaboration, right? And the last area, it has to do with systems. And so transformational leaders recognize that they have to put in place where systems, procedures, business processes, policies that is going to support their work and support change and transformation. And so all of those factors create the enabling environment. And so the questions that are asked in the assessment all relate to those 4 areas. And then once all the raters, plug in their responses and the software analyzes it, then there's a whole report that breaks down the findings for each of those areas that I just mentioned. But there's an overall rating that, the organization or the segment of the organization participating in the assessment gets. And so there's a maximum score of 80 that an organization can get. And so if you score between 80 and 64, that organization predominantly has a transformational leadership style. Okay? If you score between, I think it's 53 and let me just check my notes here, between 63 and 52, then you're in the transactional area, right? And like I said, we have found from the research that we've done, the assessment we have done, most organizations fall in that category. And then, of course, if you're under 51 and under, you're talking about authoritarian style. And I say, thankfully, all the analysis assessments we have done, we have not found any organization that has fallen in that category. And so it gives you a really, not only a snapshot view, but the report that you get breaks it down so that you can see where your strengths are and also where the gaps might be. And organizations that have done this kind of assessment have benefited tremendously. One that pops to mind is Tax Administration Jamaica. And they were involved in the initial pilot, and subsequently they have done the assessment periodically. So each time that they've done it, they look at the results and they create action plans that they implement to improve where they need to close the gaps. And I'm happy to say that they have steadily improved. And the last assessment we did with them, they are now in the transformational leadership zone as an organization.
We're forced to bring this, what I consider to be very enlightening conversation, to an end, in short order, because of course there are time limitations for everything.
Yes.
But listening to what you just said about the tax administration in Jamaica and the previous analytical work, is there advice that you think, from your perspective now as someone so heavily involved in leadership development in the Caribbean, is there advice that you would like to share about the enabling environment specifically targeted at leaders?
Certainly. The best advice I can give is to pay attention to it. We talk about these things a lot in passing, anecdotally. Something goes wrong and we vent about it. But I like to say leadership doesn't happen by chance. Leadership happens by intention. And so be intentional about supporting your leaders and really analyzing what are the things that we need to be doing to help our leaders to succeed. One of the best gifts you can give to your employees is to give them good, supported, strong leaders. It's the best gift. That compensation. The quality leader makes a world of a difference in the life of the organization, in the life of individual employees, and by extension, your clients and customers, your stakeholders that you're serving. And so pay attention to it. Be intentional about it. And start small. The journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first step. But you have to be intentional, even if you have to be incremental, because it's absolutely important. There is nothing that's ever succeeded without good leadership. Nothing in the history of mankind has ever happened without good leadership, or bad leadership for that matter.
Well, we're going to be wrapping up now, but again, listening to you and the advice you just shared, and we were thinking more of the leaders of the public service. But as we bring our discussion to a close, what about the broader public service, especially the younger people? Is there any parting message, parting in the sense of this particular discussion, not that you're not going to be engaged with young people through leadership development and all sorts of CARICAD initiatives, of course, but for this discussion, is there a parting message you'd like to leave for the broader public service?
Well, apart from saying you really want to invest in developing your leaders by participating in our leadership development programs, and you can go to our website to learn more about those. But it also comes back to that same intentionality. And so it's important that, and I'm addressing people at an individual level, that you take full control of your own development, right? There are so many opportunities for learning and for growth. And I would say get feedback. Get some feedback. It might be very useful to just have a mentor in your life. And you, Frankie, have been a mentor to so many, and that way you can get feedback and advice that sometimes hurts, Yes, might sting a little, but it's really about learning from that feedback and being very intentional and deliberate about developing yourself as leaders, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, we have the enabling environment and we want to help to build that. But how do you build an enabling environment? One leader at a time. And if enough people are developed as leaders, they start to operate collectively in a systemic way, in a positive way. And that is when you have momentum. And that's when you see transformation in our public services and in our wider Caribbean.
Well, Dr. Parkes, you've brought us to the end of this discussion on a very positive note, a very hopeful note. And for that, on behalf of your colleagues at CARICAD, I would like to say thank you very much for a most enlightening discussion. Today, we had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Lois Parkes, who heads the leadership development team at CARICAD, specifically, but generally part of the entire CARICAD team, that everything that CARICAD does, she's involved in, as is the case with the majority of the team. And I would like to remind you that you can get more information about CARICAD and our work from our website, www.caricad.net. And so until we come your way with another video presentation, be good to each other, be good to yourself, and help our public services to improve so that our countries can develop sustainably and resiliently. Thank you very much.